Fantasy readers.
Fantasy reviewers.
Fantasy countrymen.
Lend us your fancy ears. And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars, Truth and Courage.
Hello and welcome to the channel today. I'm Will, this is my brother Ed, and we're going to be talking about our top 10 favourite fantasy books of all time. What a video, Ed.
I'm excited. I've been really excited for this one. I've read some crackers of fantasy lately, and it's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. We last did this video in 2021, and when I checked the list, almost everything is different, and I think the same is for you. So as we go through this video is going to be split into two parts. Today we're talking about our 10th favourite to 5th favourite. Second video we're talking about our 4th to 1st with 3 honourable mentions. And I looked at our list, and we have got 5 books that are the same. So a little challenge to the people watching. Can you guess which ones are on both of our lists before you actually obviously watch it?
What's interesting is that Will and I, some of our authors, they're similar favourites, but we have different favourite books by them, which is really cool. So I think that's
hasn't caused any fallouts.
No, not yet. We'll see. If you diss, there's one book. If you diss it, then
I know what you're talking about.
Odysseus forever,
Ooh.
and not in a
Maybe
good
I
way.
like that.
Not in a good way.
But before we get into number 10, we just want to say, of course, we are Papa John Gwyn's sons, and he now has 10 published books out, which is pretty mental, isn't it? So
Yes,
this could
it's clinically insane.
It is insane. This could just be a video of 10 Papa Gwyn books, because we may be biased, but we adore every single one. And obviously we have that extra level of sentimentality and extra level of engagement and immersion, because we live with the man. We get to know every fact about how the world comes into being. We hear so much detail which actually gets taken out of the book, because it's the history of the world and things that in the end are
the law. Is it law accurate? Papa Gwyn
may know. Yeah, so we know so much more, but we can't just have a list of 10 Papa Gwyn books. Well, maybe we can, but we chose not to.
No, I've only chosen 6.
So we thought, let's only choose one. And we haven't set a rule of only one book per author, but I think it actually ended up being that for me. But you had no, so we haven't
only one per one.
No, I said we
Gwyn
haven't
book.
set a rule for that.
Oh, okay. I was going to say because.
Oh, Papa Gwyn book. Yeah, we said one, didn't we?
I'm going to mention 2, but is that right? You don't mind, do you?
We can allow it.
Thank you.
Anyway, let's get into number 10. And Ed, do you mind if I kick it off?
Wow, please don't kick any books.
I won't kick anyone.
You can start us off.
I will start us off.
Please.
First up, I have Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames. It can work as a standalone, but there is a book 2 as well, Bloody Rose. But this is a self-contained story, and it's about getting the band back together. Kings of the Wild is very funny, witty, humorous fantasy that is totally random, with crazy creatures, very funny character interactions, and basically a journey of a group of friends who have aged a bit, and they're seeing each other for the first time in many years, and they're being dragged back together to save one of their daughters. But amongst all that humour and wit, which it is most well known for, it has so much heart, doesn't it? When I read this, I thought, you know what, I'm going to laugh a lot. I'm probably going to really enjoy it after I heard all the reviews and all the raving and ranting. And I think you read it first and you loved it as well. So I thought I'm really going to enjoy it, but I wasn't expecting those sucker punches, you know, bringing the tears out, bringing the emotion, really making me feel the moment. And yeah, it feels very moving as well, and very heartfelt, and a lot about kind of these older characters who they're into the next phase of their life. They're out of their prime, and there's a lot of reflection. So it's a great mix of kind of that classic traditional fantasy that we love, along with kind of a whimsical journey, but then also the grit and hardcore aspect of life as well. And it is just incredible. Nicholas Ames, what a debut with Kings of the Wild. And you may hear it a little bit later from Ed, although I'm not sure.
Will it be in this list?
Maybe.
Number 10 for me, I mean, I'm going to have to mention a Papa Gwyn book. I've put it at 10.
So
it's not really number 10, but it's just so I can talk about it. 1 in this video, 1 in the next video. But it has to be Malice by Papa Gwyn. This is my... Oh, it's like my comfort blanket, The Faith and the Fallen. And Malice is the top of the blanket. You know, it's the bit that's always closest to me. I'll pull it close to me at night. Malice is just one of my favourite books. It's got all my favourite characters in. It's got these characters that feel pretty much like friends.
I mean, it's based on you, isn't there?
Yeah, I wish. I mean, I can say that they're my friends because I'm in a safe space in the internet and that all of you understand me. I wouldn't say it in real life because people would stare at me as if I'm a nutcase. But
so we don't tell them.
Now, I wish Korban was based on me, but unfortunately, as I had to admit to Chris and Mads recently in our chat with them, he's not, which is gutting.
Although you do call yourself the Bright Star on Twitter. And
William calls me the Seven Disgraces, which isn't very kind, but he is more like Dath. Malice is, I think, the perfectly balanced book of kind of slice of life, plot-driven, character-driven, epic fantasy, and it's harks back to traditional fantasy, but adds a contemporary twist in there with characters you really root for. And I always consider Papa Gwyn as David Gemmell, but the books are longer and a little bit more in-depth, and the characters have a little bit more heart, and you know, it's just Malice is just my favorite of the Faith and the Fallen, and it's just remarkable. I absolutely love it, and I love seeing characters like Korban and Storm and Cohen and all of those other characters. And I remember reading this as a boy, as a wee lad, as a bairn, we would say. I wouldn't say that because I'm not Scottish, but I remember reading it, and you know, or Papa Gwyn reading it to me as well, and just absolutely falling in love with it as a young boy. And I don't think it'll ever change. I think I'll be reading this until I have, well, probably no hair and a grey beard and all sorts of stuff. So yeah,
and it's quite typical of you to choose like the beginning, because The Lord of the Rings are your favourite books ever, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So favourite films ever.
Yes.
And your favourite bit is being in the Shire. You like the happiness.
Of course.
The happy bit. Before everyone goes off, especially with that retrospection.
I love the slice of life stuff and when the grass is green.
Yeah.
You know, I love it.
And it's even better on a reread, isn't it?
I feel like if I have an author or a book in this list that's not a book one, that to me is like even better.
Yeah.
You know, like obviously I'm not being like, well,
they've got higher standards.
Well done for getting in my list. But it's like, yeah, exactly. High standards. And I'm a sucker for a book one. So yeah.
Next up, I have The Silence of the Girls in the number 9 spot by Pat Barker. This is book 1 of the Women of Troy trilogy, although I really count it as a duology. As a duology with a similar cast of characters. So this is a Greek retelling, in my opinion, by far the best Greek retelling out there. We follow Briseis in the Trojan War, which is very unique straight away. And we see her as she becomes a slave to Agamemnon and Achilles and Patroclus and so on. So she's privy to the great events that are going on, political machinations, all the character interactions.
All these swift-footed, godlike, golden-haired characters.
Yes, so we see all of that behind closed doors from the perspective of Briseis, who's kind of pushed to the side, ignored, and not valued. It is a battle of survival in this. Briseis, it is really a study of the human condition. It's a very hard-hitting book. Like, sometimes I want to reread it and I think it might depress me. But in a brilliant way, because she is a slave and Pat Barker does not pull away from that fact. And so it can be... It is unflinching. Thank you, Ed. That is exactly what I was looking for.
Cheers.
It is an unflinching novel. And Pat Barker is just a brilliant writer and she shines above and beyond in The Silence of the Girls. Achilles and Patroclus, one of the best character relationships you will ever see. Briseis, one of the best leading characters of all time, and the whole book just comes together and it's just perfection, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's nothing I would change about The Silence of the Girls, and I would die on the hill saying that this is the best Greek retelling out there. And I've read quite a few now.
And I will stand on that hill with you.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah.
And actually, could you put that down there, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
And number 9 for me is Kings of the Wild. Now, with Kings of the Wild, I laughed, I cried, and that was just in the erection chapter. In fact, this book actually has more erections than one of Peter Baelish's houses, which is a lot. But anyway, I feel like we've got off on the wrong foot. I mean, this book is hard to top, isn't it? It's wonderful. It is such a funny fantasy. It's got these old grizzled characters who are all coming together. They've got this history. There's a layered approach to introducing them, so you feel like you really make an established connection to them each time a new character comes in. And it's proper just Dungeons and Dragons, crazy high fantasy, high stakes. Someone's trying to save their daughter. There's a lot on the line. A lot happens on the way. There's some crazy mushrooms. It's just everything you really
want
other
books
in a high fantasy book. I think it's my favourite like high fantasy, light-hearted kind of book.
Yeah.
You know? And it just does it perfectly. But there are some extremely powerful moments, especially in the latter half of the novel. There is a battle somewhere. I'm sure you can imagine.
It delivers. Because I was going to say, it does subvert your expectations a lot whilst being high fantasy, but then it also delivers a lot of those beats that you want and need as a high fantasy reader.
Nicholas Ames delivers. He is a fantastic postman. Always first class, signed for, tracked. Yeah,
the whole lot. Great the whole shebang. And then on to my number 8. I think the most recent read of mine to be on this list is The Sword of Kaigan. This book is just exceptional. There's a review on our channel if you want kind of a more in-depth look at our thoughts. But The Sword of Kaigan just blew me away. I am a character-driven reader for the most part, and this gives characters of the highest caliber across the board. It's actually quite a small cast, but I'd say there's 6 or 7 characters that are fully fleshed out better than 95% of others that you find in any other book. They are so well realised, and the epiphanies that you have, the moments when you find their motivations and agendas, it makes their characters make so much sense. You love them, you love to hate them, you love to read about them, whether you're agreeing with them or you're cringing at what they're saying, whether you agree with their ideals and what they're fighting for, or if you just love to follow them in their journey. We've got young characters, we've got mothers. Misaki is the best mother character outside of Orca. I'd put them two together. Just what a pair. Imagine if they hung out together. That would be...
And they're so different, but they have some qualities that really make them unique. And usually I think you read a lot of fantasy and you think, okay, the female character, we're just going to make her a bloke, but just say that she's a woman, basically. But both of them have these parts to their characters that make them so unique and you know, strong feminine characters, which is amazing. And from my perspective, and I absolutely love reading them, and it's everyone else's perspective as well. Everyone else says Orca's the best female character they've read. Misaki is one of the best female characters they've read. So having those two together,
Well, we're talking about them two. That is part of a demographic which is so often left out. The kind of middle-aged mother is so often not in a book, especially when you look at kind of the marriage as well. Especially fantasy books. I love fantasy, hence why we're doing this video. And I think, do you know how many fantasy books you've read?
I mean, probably close to 300.
I was going to say, on Goodreads, I think mine is like about 250, 260. So between us, there's probably 500 fantasy books we've read. So we love fantasy, but there's a lot that is left out as well. And kind of covering certain types of characters. It's often neglected, but you see it so well in The Sword of Kaigan. You have your epic action, you have your incredible magic system, but the focus is on the characters and you just adore to follow them. It is truly exceptional. And this made me laugh, made me pump my fist in the air in joy, and it made me weep as well. And because it's self-published, I think this might be one of only 2 self-published books on my list. And because of that, it can operate very differently to your traditional book as well. I won't say any more for spoilers, but it means that it doesn't have to keep to the same beats that you have to in a traditional fantasy book. But there we go. That's The Sword of Kaigan, my number 8 favourite fantasy read of all time.
Number 8 for me is a book we haven't actually spoken about this video. And it's Sword of Kaigan by ML Wang. As Will said,
you're on the jokes today, aren't you?
This is a one. Well, thank you. This is a wonderful book, and Misaki is probably the main reason why it's so brilliant. Her layered character is so unique, so much fun to read, with so much depth to her. As Will said, seeing the middle-aged mother character in fantasy is something that is widely underrepresented, and I love reading her perspective. I could read a whole trilogy, a whole quadrilogy, quartet, a whole blah, 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 of Misaki and her adventures through time. She's just such a great character. And I love the world that ML Wang built as well. And I was always kind of scared to try this. I remember it winning the SBFBO by who Mark Lawrence runs it. I remember it winning in 2016, I think, and thinking, okay, I love Samurai, I love the cover, I bought it straight away, but it had like video games in it, I remember people mentioning, and I was like, whoa, I do not mix any urban stuff with my fantasy. But, you know, if you've heard that, I've seen some people in the Discord say that put them off at the beginning as well. After the first 2 pages, you don't really notice it at all.
No, you don't.
At all.
But... And you actually find it's the way it's built into the history of the world, which is... top notch.
Yeah. And I find her son, Misaki's son, is such a great character as well. Rarely are children written appropriately to their age. Now, as a teacher, it felt like exhilarating to actually find an author who kind of captured a child's spirit in their writing, which is really hard, I think.
It is, because you want them to have agency, don't you? And you want them to
either they have zero
individualism,
or they have so much that they're like they're basically adults.
Yeah,
you know, I think Vin from Mistborn for me is a young adult who is written with no kind of balance.
She doesn't feel like a child.
No. But to me, Mamoru, isn't it, does, but brilliantly. It's not like annoying to read. It's just really well done. And I think the strongest part of this book is the fact that it's self-published. That is so kind of, it's just moulded by Emma Wang. It's not moulded by any people in the publishing industry. It's not, you know, no one's saying you should cut this, you should do this. You're trying to become a more traditionally published book. Its strength is that it's self-published. So yeah, this is a great blueprint of how to do fantasy in a unique, marvellous way.
And Ed, we've already got through 2 of the books that we've both mentioned.
And you said 5, wasn't there?
Yeah, so there's 5. And so, do you know what the others will be? Did you get those first few? But next up in the number 7 spot for me, I have We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle. This is just one of the best opening installments of a series that I've ever read. Take the premise, imagine if Sauron actually won. What would the aftermath be? That is We Are the Dead. You've got a city...
And yes, it's better than Rings of Power.
It is better than Rings of Power. And that's not...
That's not hard.
That's not subjective, is it? But We Are the Dead, so you've got a city that has been taken over very recently. And we've got an array of perspectives. We follow those who have taken over, as well as many who are just trying to survive. We've got members of a resistance, members of a terrorist group, and people who are just trying to survive, really. And they've got a young child. And across the board... One of the best things Mike Shackle is best at is that bringing all these characters from different demographics and backgrounds and motivations and different levels of society as well, bringing all their stories together so they intertwine. There's a reason for them to be brought together. And when you see kind of their stories intertwine and weave in and out of each other, and you also see kind of the ripple effect from one storyline into the other, it is just so rewarding and satisfying.
I mean, it's an explosive book.
Yeah, it is. It is explosive, and if you've read it, you may know what Ed is referencing. But We Are the Dead is absolutely incredible. From the first page to the end, it is a riveting read. It is just truly a roller coaster of a ride. Because
it's the most underappreciated fantasy book I've ever read.
I totally agree. And I think that Mike Shackle also has that kind of similar Papa Gwyn quality, where ending his chapters on cliffhangers, but not in a way that is infuriating. It's a cliffhanger, which means that you cannot wait to be back with that character again.
And that book flies.
They are binge-worthy books. Yeah, because there's quite a few big books that I love. A few on this list, but I wouldn't be able to read them all in 2 or 3 sessions. I could read this just in one go. I could read Shadow of the Gods in one go, because they're just so easy to lap up and you don't get tired of them.
That just shows what kind of life you lead. That you could read them in a whole day. You've got nothing else to do.
I didn't mean that. But I would describe this as a page turner. Absolutely. And it is truly exceptional. So that is my number 7.
And my number 7, it's weird that you've gone first. We're not used to it. But my number 7 is a book that Will mentioned.
You just got to stop
slightly higher up on my list than yours. But
which is interesting.
I have read it twice. You introduced Pat Barker to me when we met her. We didn't really meet her. But have you read it twice or once?
Twice.
Okay, I read it twice. So maybe it's recency bias because I read it last month. But I think Pat Barker is my favourite prose writer.
So good.
And the way that she crafts mainly Patroclus and Achilles, somehow it's like the most tender relationship I've ever read. And it's like actually brings a tear to my eye seeing them together. But then knowing what Briseis knows, knowing what they have done through the war, all this kind of stuff just seeped into Achilles, specifically his character. It's just a book of like juxtapositions.
I was going to say, I don't think I've ever felt kind of a conflict within me about how I feel about a character on the same level, which is
much
what
like
our
the main character herself feels.
Yeah.
And I feel really passionate, as you can probably tell, about talking about this book. And it's just a book that I could... Bless you. Bless you. Wow, what a cute little...
Sorry.
Like a little squirrel sneeze.
Sorry, Ed. That was very rude of me.
The Silence of Will's Nose is just one of my favourite books. And it's just brilliant. But Will summed it up perfectly earlier. But I'd love to talk more about this book another time. Maybe like a proper video about this in the second book, perhaps. But
maybe that's something you'll be seeing in the future.
Maybe. Oh, I
Maybe.
thought you were on a Weasley kind of platform.
You were looking at
Oh.
the sky. I thought there was like a moth.
Sorry,
or something.
I thought you could read my mind
See,
again.
we
but-
may be called the Weasleys sometimes, but we're not quite there. Maybe one day. But next up in the number 6
Hand-me-down
spot,
robes? You must be the Weasleys.
Ed is brilliant. One of his hidden qualities that sometimes emerges in these videos is his knowledge of quotes. So there we go. If you see any others, basically Ed, everyone thinks he's very funny, which you are, but you borrow the humour from films.
It's called pillaging.
The king of references.
Yeah.
There we go. Anyway, on to number 6, Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. This is just incredible fantasy. You know when you get that rare feeling, one page into a book, and you just know, I'm going to love this.
Yeah.
You get that kind of tingling feeling, and you're just like, wow,
Yeah.
I'm in for a journey. From the beginning, it mentions the day's death. I was like, what a name. So, Empire of the Vampire, of course, it's in the title, there's vampires.
But it's an empire of them.
But they're not crystally shining, beautiful, wonderful
No.
people.
They paint the town red.
They are terrifying. And day's death is basically a natural phenomenon that has occurred that has dimmed the sun. And so, of course, that's going to have some pretty serious environmental consequences.
No one needs sunglasses, so no one ever looks as cool as they could.
But I think they've got different priorities there. The
True.
crops are failing.
Yeah.
There's natural disasters. But it also means vampires can walk in daylight. Great.
No.
As if things weren't bad enough as it is. But then, on top of this, Jay Kristoff, he just shows his incredible, immense skill as an author. This is a dual timeline. We've got kind of an interview of the vampire style as our main character, Gabrielle de Leon, is being interviewed.
I love the way you say that.
Gabrielle de Leon. You just can't say it normally.
It's on the shoulders.
I've heard it's actually incredible as an audiobook that Damien Lynch is brilliant with kind of the French flavour.
Nice.
So,
he is a really good narrator.
I think it was Andrews Wizardly Reads who said that. His
Very
surname
nice.
is Reads and his middle name is Wizardly, if you were
yeah.
wondering. But anyway, no more tangents. Empire of the Vampire. The characters are incredible. The creativity is just on level 100. It is rare that you'll find a book that is kind of fantasy. It takes a lot of what we love, but twists them and presents them in very new ways. You've
Yeah.
got the training school kind of trope, but in such a unique manner. As I said, Day's Death, that way of making vampires powerful, another example of the creativity. And of course, the others I won't say for spoilers. But Gabrielle de Leon is incredible. This isn't a book for everyone. There's quite a lot of profanity, which for me, it made sense with the characters. It wasn't like just doing it for the sake of it. There's a lot of people swear a lot in real life and it doesn't... It's just a fact, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's often not reflected in books.
I hope there's a lot of stuff that happens in this book that people don't do in real life, though, because
So do
Jay
I.
Kristoff has a very warped mind.
He does.
But I am here for it.
He does.
Yeah.
But it is very engaging
Love
to read about. But this is incredibly immersive, and I need to read book 2, which I've heard is actually even better.
Well, I've
by
always
many
said that
people.
Jay Kristoff is kind of the writer that I feel like sits down at his desk and he's like, okay, today I'm going to write the most iconic scene I can think of.
Oh.
And like every line, every passage, every action, it feels iconic. Like you just, I think that's the only way I can sum it
He
up.
does not have a weakness as a writer,
No.
so he can just explore so many
Yeah,
directions.
he's so strong.
But there we go. Number 6, Empire of the Vampire, the penultimate book I'm talking about today.
Number 6 for me is David Gemmell, the kind of well, not the uncle, what do we say he was? So Tolkien's the grandfather of fantasy.
Maybe like the cousin.
I think
don't know.
David Gemmell's maybe the father of fantasy. Do you feel like that's correct?
I'd say he's like related to Tolkien.
He's definitely in the
you know.
family. Okay.
Yeah.
But David Gemmell,
I think you
Sword
had
and
it,
Storm
Uncle.
is
I think
my.
you had
Well,
it.
I feel like Uncle was the bloke who wrote Conan. I always forget his name. Is
Not
E.
Arthur
Howard?
Conan. Yeah, Robert E. Howard.
Robert E. Howard.
I always want to say Arthur Conan Doyle, but that's just
I
because his
know.
middle name is Conan.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And it says
Sherlock is very different.
Yeah. But David Gemmell, Sword and Storm, book 1 of the Regante series. This is a Celtic-inspired fantasy, a little bit like Faith and the Fallen, but obviously this came first. And this features the character Conovar, and he is a young boy growing up. You have some slice of life stuff. He's growing up in the Regante, this Celtic tribe, essentially, and he's becoming Conovar. And it's an amazing story. He meets wonderful people on the way. He does great things. He becomes a great man. And what I love about David Gemmell is that he sets him up to be such a great guy. And then he makes such blundering, huge mistakes that have huge ripples in the pond of what is to come in the land of the Regante. And you don't quite realise the consequences of Conovar's actions until you see it later on in this book and in the next book as well.
Sows the seeds.
It really does. It's so good.
Destruction.
I always find David Gemmell's dialogue is brilliant, and I think his action is fantastic. I just don't think anyone can write a flawed hero as well as David Gemmell.
He was ahead of his time, wasn't he?
He really was, and I think if he was still writing today, because unfortunately he passed away, I think in the early 2000s. If he was still writing today, or was a new author today, I think he would just blow up. I mean, I know he's popular, and I think we realise how popular he was. Yeah,
I think he had 34 books out, and every single one was a Sunday Times bestseller.
That is pretty popular, to be fair. But in modern day, I wish he was read more. And I know sometimes his book's a little bit dated, like particularly Legend is a little bit dated. But to me, The Sword and the Storm is just a masterpiece of fantasy that everyone has to read at some point in their life.
Do you know when it was written?
I want to say early 90s.
I can have it pop up on the screen if we
That'd be wonderful.
But anyway,
98.
98, yeah. So one of his final books, I think. Maybe it was these and then onto the Troy series.
Yeah, Troy was his last series, wasn't it?
Because book 3 was finished by his wife, actually, Stella Gemmell.
And he's literally saying Stella in here.
Wow, look
Dedicated
at that. We've had the pleasure of meeting, haven't we?
We have, yes.
Pleasure and privilege. But anyway, on to the last books that we're talking about today. My number 5 is... It's a song... sorry, no, it's not a song. It's a book from A Song of Ice and Fire. But...
Now, let me guess. Hang on. I know, but I think everyone would say Sword and Storm. Which is wrong.
Storm of Swords.
Sorry.
Because he's just talking about...
Sword and Storm. Oh, what? Storm...
Yeah.
He copied David Gemmell.
Well, I think... Yeah, maybe he did.
Storm of Swords came after, didn't it? 98.
Yeah.
Early 2000s,
yeah, because I think Game of Thrones came out like 2000, 1999, so yeah that's it.
So, obviously, everyone says A Storm of Swords, which is wrong.
You can't say that.
It's wrong.
I think...
It's not.
Anyway, let's just show. My number 5 is A Clash of Kings.
Yeah, good choice.
So the second instalment of A Song of Ice and Fire. I know most people say that A Storm of Swords is the best fantasy book of all time. I'm not sure if it's because a lot of the twists and turns of A Storm of Swords I already knew, whereas a lot of the twists and turns in A Clash of Kings I didn't know.
But I feel like the best fantasy book of all time should, even if you know the twists, it should still feel exhilarating.
I mean, I might have been a bit harsh not putting Storm of Swords on here. I did adore it. But A Clash of Kings, for me...
I think it's much better.
I wasn't the biggest fan of Tyrion in book 1.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was good, but he was far from standout. But here, he becomes one of like the top 5 fantasy characters of all time. This is where I think the political machinations hit just a whole new level. I thought A Game of Thrones was incredible, worthy of the hype, absolutely fantastic. Probably if this was a list of your top 15, probably Storm of Swords and Game of Thrones would be on here. But A Clash of Kings, for me, just, oh my word, Tyrion.
I think it struck a balance so well.
That's what I was going to say. You've got all the storylines, but it doesn't feel like there's a weakness. I think for me in the first few books, Daenerys is kind of the weaker character for me. But even in here, I think her story is really good.
Right.
No, but there's no weakness. There's no chapters I was like, oh, come on, I want to get back to the other characters. And this is, I think, just under 1,000 pages. And that's very impressive. It was just electric. It was magnetic. And it was just drawing me along the pages. I remember just reading this. I remember just in the car, just sat, just basically in a ball, just reading this. I think like you were talking to Mama and Papa Gwyn. And usually, you know, when we're all together, we don't get as much time together as we did when we were younger. So I make the most of those moments. But I thought, you know what? No, I need to read this. I just had headphones in.
Saying that you were incredibly rude.
Yeah, you probably were, but I couldn't hear. I was too honed in on this. But A Clash of Kings just transported me to a whole new world. And it's where I fell in love properly with the land of A Song of Ice and Fire. Nice. So that is A Clash of Kings. And yeah, it's number 5. My 5th favourite fantasy book of all time. And it is a titan of the genre on the list. And that leads me on to another kind of subtopic. We don't have a lot of the kind of big series on here because we haven't read Malazan. Well, you've read the first 2 books. I read the first 3 books of The Wheel of Time, but about 8-9 years ago. And so I think they went a little bit over my head. I did take them slowly, but I think...
See, I wouldn't let anything go over my head.
Your reflexes are too fast. All right, Drax, that's what I was talking about earlier, the quotes. But anyway, that's my number 5. On to the final one that you're talking about today.
Now, today is something different, and it is Berserk, which is the deluxe number 3 edition, which is if I just quickly look, it shall be volume 7, 8, and 9. And, well, the volumes in here just sum up why Berserk, I think, is such a special series. I think they capture the character of Guts as well as the whole crew so perfectly. And you've also got some really heartwarming moments here. Now, you've got Guts, who's, you know, he's a survivor of a whole lot of stuff that's happened to him. And the author of this series, Kentaro Miura, he went to really dark places in this series, but I feel like these volumes are done well. Sometimes it's a bit overblown, sometimes it does feel a little bit like it's not very tasteful, you know. But I feel like these volumes are handled like perfectly, and there were moments where I felt really emotional. And I think to have an emotional connection to kind of a medium as this is a really hard thing. Like, you can always look at the artwork and think that is epic, like that is so cool, that is badass, as people would say. That is, you know, that's wicked. But I think to read a manga like this and then actually feel something in your chest is quite remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this has the story of wounds in here, which that's all I will say. But it's just one of my favourite, you know, pieces of fantasy that I've consumed in the last few years. It's such a great balance. Again, this book, it has, you know, sad moments, it has heartwarming moments, it has epic action, it forwards the plot to a whole new level, it's got a lot of sowing of seeds, foreshadowing, but it's just handled brilliantly, and I absolutely adore it, and I have loved being on the Berserk journey. I haven't finished yet, but I'm really enjoying it, but this is kind of the peak for me so far.
Very nice. And I think that might be the only text you've got, which I've not read yet.
Really?
Yeah, I think
really?
So.
Okay, so, that's cool.
There we go. That is what we're talking about today. 10 to 5 of our favourite fantasy books of all time. Our next video will probably be out next week, talking about the latter half, the creme de la creme, the crown on top of the pile, the top
the icing
4,
on the cake,
as well,
the cherry on the icing on the cake.
As well as we call it a top 10, but we do cheat in our own videos, so we've included some honourable mentions. Yeah. So there may be a few other books that we're talking about as well. But everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let us know if you guessed any of these books. Let us know if any of these are your favourites. And please do give us a list of your top 10. And it does feel really horrible cutting it to 10. I think my first list was 16, and it felt like, you know, killing off your darlings, cutting them off at the bottom. It's very difficult.
It's horrid. It's really horrid.
Everyone, thank you so much for sticking with us today throughout the tangents and the rambling and the waffling and just the loving of
Exhibit
the books. A. But everyone, thanks so much for watching. Truth and Courage, the Brothers Gwyn.
Truth and Courage, the Brothers Gwyn.